Close your eyes and listen. Past the deafening roar of earth-shaking artillery. Past the rhythmic, mechanical crack of thousands of Laskans firing into the suffocating dark. Down in the mud, choked by the stench of promethium and burnt ozone. You hear it. A wet, desperate gurgling. A young guardsman, no older than 20, clutching the charred, cauterized stump where his legs used to be. Melted away by a traitor's plasma blast. He is screaming for salvation. He is praying for an angel in white to descend into the trench and pull him from the abyss. But there are no angels in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. When the smoke finally parts, the figure that kneels beside him does not bring a gentle touch or whispered promises of survival. They bring stained hands, a dull, blood-crusted bone saw, and eyes hollowed out by 1,000 previous failures. This is the Imperial Guard Medic, a role romanticized in ancient earthen histories as a beacon of hope, but twisted by the Imperium into something fundamentally horrifying. They are not here to heal you. They are here to patch the Emperor's broken tools. To understand the true nightmare of this existence, you must strip away every modern concept of medical care. Consider this. You are not a doctor. You are a mechanic of flesh, operating in a galaxy where human life is the cheapest, most abundant currency imaginable. The Administratum does not care about individual suffering. The High Lords of Terror do not weep for a shattered femur or a collapsed lung. They only care about holding the line. And your sole purpose is to force shattered bodies back onto that line. It is an agonizing burden, pushing men back into the meat grinder long after they should have been allowed the mercy of death. If you are brave enough to peer beneath the blood-soaked bandages of the Astra Militarum, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Today, we decode the psychological torment and brutal reality of being an Imperial Guard Medic in Warhammer 40K. Prepare yourself, because in the trenches of the Imperium, survival is often a fate far worse than the grave. To comprehend your existence, you must first grasp the sheer, suffocating scale of the Astra Militarum. The Imperium of Man does not wage war with millions, or even billions, of soldiers. It deploys trillions across a million worlds. To the cold, calculating scribes of the Administratum on Terra, these are not individuals with hopes, families, or dreams. They are merely numbers inked on vellum, a mathematical equation where flesh is spent to purchase time. In this incomprehensible machine of unending war, human life is objectively the cheapest, most easily replenished resource available. Consider this brutal reality. It often takes more time, effort, and industrial capacity to manufacture a standard-issue Mars pattern Laskin than it does to conscript and train the soldier who wields it. When a guardsman falls, the weapon is retrieved. The body is left to rot. Where, then, does an Imperial Guard Medic fit into this bleak calculus? The answer is a grim one. You are not a scholar of advanced anatomy, nor are you a master of holistic healing dedicated to the preservation of life. In the eyes of the Departmentum Unitorum, you are simply a battlefield technician. Your specialized training is not designed to cure disease or ensure long-term recovery. It is exclusively engineered to stop catastrophic leaks in the Emperor's meat shields, keeping the human wall intact just a little longer. The medical instruction you receive is rudimentary, bloody, and entirely focused on rapid, aggressive stabilization under fire. You are taught the brutal art of cauterization, how to aggressively staple torn flesh together, and the exact dosage of combat stimms required to force a dying man to his feet. You learn to work with your hands submerged in mud and gore, ignoring the deafening roar of artillery and the frantic pleas of the wounded. But what if a soldier is too far gone? What if the horrific weaponry of the 41st millennium has shattered them beyond any functional repair? The brutal truth of your indoctrination dictates that you do not waste a single second or a single drop of precious medication on the dying. Empathy, in your line of work, is not a virtue. It is a fatal flaw that will inevitably cost the lives of those who can still fight. Your true duty, stripped of all its noble pretense, is essentially biological recycling. You are tasked with taking a broken, terrified human being and aggressively forcing their ruined physiology to function for just a few more hours. You pump them full of chemical courage and synthetic coagulants so they can hold a trench, charge a bunker, or simply take another bowl to round mint for someone more important. You do not save them, you merely delay their sacrifice. Ultimately, you realize that you are nothing more than a rusted cog in a galactic meat grinder, desperately trying to ensure the machine's teeth stay sharp. There is no lasting glory in your grim work, no statues carved in your honor. There is only the sickening, endless repetition of blood, mud, and scream. As you try to hold back the tide of death in a universe that actively demands it, to truly grasp the nightmare of your daily existence, you must examine the tools of your trade. The standard issue Imperial Guard Medic pack is not a kit designed for delicate healing or the meticulous preservation of human life. It is a heavy, utilitarian metal box, often dented by shrapnel and permanently stained with the dried blood of your predecessors. It is the toolbox of a flesh mechanic. When you pop the latches, you are not greeted by sterile instruments of mercy. You are greeted by the harsh, chemical stench of industrial-grade antiseptics mixed with the metallic tang of old iron. The first item you pull from this grim kit is often the diagnostic auspex or a rudimentary biomonitor. In a better universe, this device would be used to chart a course for a patient's recovery. In the 41st millennium, it serves a much darker purpose. It is a tool of cold, mathematical triage. It does not tell you how to save the screaming soldier beneath you. It merely calculates if their meat and bone are still structurally sound enough to justify the expenditure of your limited medical supplies. Consider the horrifying reality of battlefield wounds in this era. You are not dealing with simple kinetic bullets from primitive firearms. You are facing the hyper-destructive reality of mass-reactive bolt rounds that detonate inside the ribcage, flesh-melting plasma that turns bone into slag, and monomolecular shuriken shrapnel that slices through organs like water. Traditional gauze and delicate bandages are entirely useless against this level of anatomical devastation. You need something faster, something infinitely more brutal to plug the holes in the Emperor's infantry. Enter skin, a staple of Astra Militarum battlefield medicine. This is a sprayable, rapid-curing polymetric chemical designed to seal catastrophic breaches in the human hull instantly. It is highly effective, but it is not a kindness. When applied to an open, gaping wound, the chemical reaction burns like liquid fire. It forcefully bonds with torn muscle and shattered veins, searing the nerve endings as it hardens. It traps dirt, sweat, and toxic shrapnel inside the wound forever. But it undeniably stops the catastrophic blood loss. You must understand that skin is not a treatment. It is a desperate, temporary patch. But as an Imperial medic, your hands cannot afford to shake. Empathy is a luxury that will get you both killed. You pin their flailing limbs down into the muddy trench, ignore their frantic pleas for mercy, and keep spraying until the red flow finally ceases. When chemical sprays are not enough to hold a shattered body together, you turn to the auto-cauterizers and heavy surgical staplers. When a traitor's chainsword brutally rips open a guardsman's abdomen, spilling their viscera into the dirt, you do not have time for precision. You aggressively shove the organs back into the cavity, grab the pneumatic stapler, and punch thick. The mechanical sound of the stapler rhythmically syncs with the distant, earth-shattering thud of basilisk artillery cannons. It is a crude, medieval solution. It leaves jagged, agonizing scars that will violently pull and tear with every future movement the soldier makes. The risk of necrotic infection is astronomical. But in the immediate chaos of the battlefield, The soldiers' intestines are no longer spilling into the mud, and that means they are technically fit to return to the firing line. Beyond physical patches, your kit contains a terrifying chemical arsenal. The Imperium relies heavily on brutal alchemy to override basic human physiology when the flesh inevitably fails. True painkillers, the kind that bring genuine comfort, are an extreme luxury usually reserved for the officer class. For the common infantryman, you are issued localized, harsh numbing agents that barely take the edge off a severed limb. They are just enough to keep the soldier from passing out from the pain, keeping them conscious enough to hold a weapon. They turn a crippled, dying man into a high-progressive berserker who can no longer feel his own body tearing itself apart. You are not easing their suffering. You are weaponizing their final moments. You inject the stim directly into the heart or a major artery, and wait for the monstrous reaction. The effect is violently instantaneous. The dying soldier's eyes dilate to the point of pure, terrifying blackness. Veins bulge against their temples like thick cables. Ruined muscles spasm and contract forcefully, often tearing against the very metal staples you just applied seconds ago. The philosophical horror of the combat stim is profound. You are actively stripping away the very last shreds of their humanity, replacing their natural survival instinct with a chemically induced, suicidal martyrdom demanded by the God Emperor. They violently rise to their feet, grabbing their laskin with blood-slicked hands, completely oblivious to the fact that their shattered bones are grinding into dust with every step they take towards the enemy. You watch them charge back into the meat grinder, knowing full well that their heart will inevitably explode from the chemical strain within the hour. You did not save their life. You merely repurposed their death for the tactical advantage of the regiment. This is the grim reality of Imperial triage. And finally, buried at the bottom of your kit, is the most iconic and terrifying tool of all, the bone saw, or if you are properly equipped, the motorized chain scalpel. In a war zone filled with necrotic tyranid bioacid, radioactive fallout, and horrific Nurgle-born plagues, saving a limb is often a fatal mistake. When a leg is hopelessly crushed under the treads of an orc truck, or flesh begins to rot from warp-tainted shrapnel, immediate, brutal amputation is the only sanctioned medical response. There is no sterile, brightly lit operating theater waiting for them. There is only a jagged crater filled with muddy, blood-stained rainwater. You aggressively apply a brutal tourniquet above the wound, completely ignoring the soldier's frantic, sobbing begging. You rev the roaring teeth of the motorized saw, drowning out their screams, as the spinning blades bite into bone and marrow. Hot blood sprays violently across your respirator visor, blinding you to the horrific mutilation you're inflicting upon a fellow human being. The sheer physical exertion required to aggressively saw through dense human bone, while under active enemy fire, is completely exhausting. It is the bloody, mindless work of a butcher, not a healer. Once the limb is fully severed, you casually toss the ruined meat aside into the trench. You aggressively slap a thick layer of synth skin on the bleeding stump, violently inject another dose of combat stimms into their neck, and immediately move on to the next screaming voice in the dark. In the ancient, forgotten medical texts of old terror, triage was a noble system designed to save the maximum number of lives. In the trenches of the Astra Militarum, triage is a cold, calculated equation of combat efficiency. You are not evaluating who is suffering the most. You are evaluating who can still pull a trigger. It is a terrifying psychological burden, forcing you to look weeping, dying man in the eyes and mathematically decide his life is not worth a bandage. The brutal doctrine of the Departmentum Unitorum dictates a ruthless, unforgiving hierarchy of salvation. Officers, heavy weapons specialists, and tech priests are prioritized above all else. If a commissar has a superficial flesh wound and a conscript is rapidly bleeding out from a severed artery, The Emperor's law demands you tend to the commissar first. You must physically step over the dying, violently kicking away their desperate, grasping hands to apply your limited coagulants to commence death. Consider the sheer, soul-crushing horror of this daily responsibility. You are forced to play God in a universe where the divine is silent and uncaring. You must walk the muddy trench line, an Auspex medical scanner in one hand and a loaded las pistol in the other. Those deemed mathematically beyond recovery are not given comfort or painkillers. They are given the Emperor's peace, a single, clinical loss bolt to the skull to conserve supplies and prevent their agonizing screams from shattering unit morale. Now imagine the true test of your rapidly fraying sanity, facing the unimaginable Xenos horrors of the galaxy. The enemies of mankind do not leave clean, easily treatable kinetic wounds. Let us examine a grim case study. A Tyranid swarm has violently breached the defensive perimeter. Our guardsman is dragged to your station, his flak armor violently dissolved by a Tyranid bioacid projector. The living, corrosive enzyme is not just burning his flesh, it is actively digesting his ribs and liquefying his lungs in real time. Standard Imperial medical texts have no viable answer for an alien weapon that aggressively eats organic matter. The hyper-reactive acid spreads rapidly, turning the man's internal organs into a bubbling, agonizing soup of necrotic tissue. Your advanced synth skin is entirely useless. It simply melts away upon contact. You have mere seconds to make a choice. There is no cure, no chemical neutralizer. The only sanctioned medical response is immediate amputation. But you cannot amputate a human torso. You can only watch him dissolve alive. Or perhaps your regiment is deployed against the silent, skeletal menace of the Necrons. A soldier takes a glancing hit from a standard Gauss flare. This ancient weapon does not burn or cut. It violently strips a target apart at the subatomic level. The Godsman's arm is simply gone, replaced by a perfectly smooth, localized erasure of reality. But the latent energetic field continues to slowly unravel the surrounding living tissue. You watch in sheer, paralyzing terror as their shoulder flakes away into glowing, green dust. In both of these horrifying scenarios, the heavy medical bag slung over your shoulder feels like a cruel, twisted joke. You cannot stitch together unraveling atoms, and you cannot aggressively bandage expanding bioacid. The brutal, suffocating reality of your profession finally crashes down upon you. You are entirely powerless against the true, eldritch nightmares of the cosmos. Your only viable option is to draw your pistol and grant them a quick death before the Xenos weaponry finishes its methodical work. This unending cycle of impossible choices and forced executions will inevitably fracture your soul. The faces of those you coldly left to die will haunt your every waking moment. If you find yourself captivated by this dark descent into the brutal realities of the 41st millennium, take a brief moment to subscribe and like the video. Support the channel so we can continue to decode the most horrifying and untold lore of Warhammer 40K. Now, let us return to the darkness of the meat grinder. But the enemy's weapons are not the only threat to the lives you so desperately try to stitch together. Consider the darkest paradox of your grim profession, the overarching, suffocating presence of their physio-prefectors, the commissars. While you fight an unwinnable war against physical death, they wage a ruthless campaign against fear and insubordination. And in the trenches of the Astra Militarum, their absolute authority will constantly mock your desperate attempts at preservation. Picture this agonizing scenario. You have just spent 5 agonizing minutes pinned under heavy suppressing fire. You used your last vial of synthetic coagulant and your cleanest staples to close a massive shrapnel wound on a weeping conscript. The boy broke under the pressure. He threw down his lascan and tried to flee the front line before a mortar blast tore his back open. You dragged him back. You stabilized him. You did your duty. Then, a long, terrifying shadow falls over your muddy workspace. The commissar steps down into the trench, their iconic peaked cap silhouetted against the burning sky, a bold pistol resting casually in their grip. They do not look at the miraculous medical work you have just performed. They do not care that you have managed to keep this boy's heart beating against all mathematical odds. They only see a guardsman who turned his back on the enemy. You attempt to intervene, to explain that the shock is chemical, that with a heavy dose of combat stimms he can hold a rifle again. But what if your medical assessment contradicts the rigid dogma of the Imperium? The commissar simply raises their weapon. A single, deafening crack echoes through the trench. The boy's head violently snaps back, and the life you just fought so desperately to preserve is instantly extinguished by friendly fire. This is the ultimate, soul-crushing counterargument to your entire existence as a healer. You just wasted irreplaceable medical supplies and precious minutes on a designated card. The commissar glares at you, a silent warning that challenging their summary judgment will earn you the exact same fate. You are entirely powerless. You cannot mourn, and you cannot scream at the sheer, maddening futility of it all. Empathy is treason. You must violently bury the bubbling rage deep inside your chest. You silently wipe the fresh spray of brain matter and blood off your respirator visor. You pack your dented, heavy medical kit, step over the freshly executed corpse, and crawl toward the next desperate cry for help. You finally realize that in the Astra Militarum, the commissar is the ultimate surgeon. They cure the disease of fear, while you only treat the temporary symptoms of flesh. To understand the true cost of this profession, we must look beyond the physical butchery. The human mind is not designed to process the sheer, suffocating volume of trauma experienced by an Imperial Guard Medic. You are subjected to a continuous, unending feed of horrific visceral destruction that would instantly shatter the sanity of a normal citizen. The first casualty of your service is your sense of touch. The phantom sensation of hot, sticky blood coating your fingers never truly washes away. The heavy, metallic stench of ruptured veins and void sweat becomes permanently etched into your olfactory nerves, following you into the deepest, darkest recesses of your bunker. Have you ever wondered what truly breaks the mind of an Imperial Guard Medic? It is not the terrifying sight of a tyrannid swarm cresting a hill, and it is not the deafening roar of chaos artillery. The true, absolute horror of this cursed existence is not what you witness during the chaos of the battlefield. It is what you are forced to hear when the guns finally stop firing, when the muddy trench falls entirely silent. The phantom sounds violently invade your skull. You hear the wet, desperate gurgling of collapsed lungs. You hear the frantic, sobbing whispers of a boy whose shattered legs you just sawed off without anesthesia. You physically feel their cold, trembling hands aggressively grabbing at your flak armor in the pitch-black darkness, desperately trying to pull you down into the bloody mud with them. You suddenly realize that you have not just been blindly patching physical wounds. You have been unknowingly hoarding the agonizing psychological trauma of 1,000 dying men. To survive this mental onslaught, you must aggressively and entirely kill your own empathy. If you find yourself captivated by this grim descent into the madness of the Astra Militarum, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the dark lore of Warhammer 40K. You must actively force yourself to become a functional sociopath. If you feel pity, your hands will shake. If your hands shake, you hesitate. And hesitation on the front lines of the 41st millennium guarantees immediate death. You slowly transform into a cold, calculating automaton, essentially becoming a living, breathing medical servitor without the merciful release of a surgical lobotomy. Sleep offers absolutely no refuge from this waking nightmare. Rest is merely a vivid, high-definition replay of your most catastrophic medical failures, to avoid the horrifying faces of the damned waiting for you in your dreams. You inevitably begin to aggressively abuse the very combat stimms you issue to your patients. You pump your own veins full of chemical wakefulness, trading your long-term sanity for just a few more hours of artificial, vibrating alertness. This dark transformation breeds a terrifying isolation. You are surrounded by thousands of fellow guardsmen, yet you are entirely alone. The regular infantry actively avoid your gaze. They know that you are the physical embodiment of their own fragile mortality. When you approach with your heavily dented medical kit, it means excruciating pain is imminent. They do not see a savior. They see a Grim Reaper dressed in blood-soaked flak armor. Ultimately, the psychological weight of the grim dark future crushes your humanity into fine, unrecognizable dust. You are left as an empty, hollowed-out shell, functioning purely on military indoctrination and harsh chemical stimulants. You hail the flesh of the Imperium's war machine, but in the brutal process, your own soul is aggressively and permanently torn apart, leaving a bleeding wound that no amount of synthetic skin or metal staples could ever possibly close. To truly decode the existence of an Imperial Guard Medic, you must recognize them as the perfect, bleeding microcosm of the entire Imperium of man. You are a fragile, desperate entity aggressively fighting a completely unwinnable war against galactic entropy, just as the Emperor sits upon the golden throne, violently sacrificing thousands of souls daily to keep the Astronomicon burning. You sacrifice the humanity of your patients to keep the front line from collapsing. It is an empire built entirely on the brutal exploitation of human suffering. Consider the stark, horrifying contrast between you and the mythical Adeptus Astartes. Space Marines are genetically forged demigods, encased in impenetrable ceramite, entirely immune to fear and disease. You, however, are just a fragile sack of meat and bone, armed with nothing but a dented metal box of archaic tools and a heavily stained apron. You do not have the luxury of genetically enhanced healing or superior biology. You face the exact same eldritch horrors, but you do it with primitive bandages and raw, unadulterated human desperation. The ultimate truth of the Astra Militarum is that it does not value human life. It only strictly values combat utility. The moment a soldier's capacity to inflict violence drops below acceptable administrative parameters, they cease to be a person and immediately become a logistical burden. Your horrifying role is to violently reset that equation. You are the grim accountant of the battlefield, forcefully extracting the absolute final ounce of utility from a shattered human body before it is permanently discarded into a mass grave. You are eternally trapped in an agonizing, infinite loop of violence and futility. You aggressively staple a man's stomach closed at dawn, forcefully pump his veins full of synthetic adrenaline, and send him screaming back into the mud. By dusk, that exact same man will inevitably return to you in a body bag, completely torn apart by a traitor's heavy bolt around. You did not change his brutal fate. You merely delayed his inevitable execution by a few agonizing hours. This is the sickening Ouroboros of Imperial warfare. Ultimately, you become the most profound tragic figure in the entire 41st millennium. You possess the fundamental medical knowledge to genuinely heal, to provide comfort, and to preserve fragile life. Yet, the unforgiving, suffocating reality of the Grimdark universe aggressively forces you to act as a mere butcher. You are a reluctant agent of the relentless meat grinder, desperately trying to hold back the infinite tide of cosmic death with a dull bone saw and a tearing roll of synthetic skin. And so, we arrive at the bitter, inevitable conclusion of your grim service. For all the shattered bones you have aggressively clamped together, and all the violently torn flesh you have sealed with synthetic fire, there is a fundamental, terrifying truth waiting for you in the mud. When the heavy artillery finally finds your trench, or a stray traitor's bolt round effortlessly shatters your own ribs, you will suddenly find yourself entirely alone. There is no specialized angel in white waiting to descend into the crater to aggressively pull you back from the abyss. The heavily dented, Blood-stained medical kit strapped to your chest is completely useless when your own hands are violently blown away. Your fellow guardsmen, the very men you forcefully pumped full of chemical courage just moments ago, will not stop their desperate, suicidal charge to drag your ruined body to safety. You will simply bleed out in the suffocating darkness, surrounded by the deafening roar of a galaxy that does not even register your agonizing absence. You are just another broken tool permanently discarded by the relentless machinery of the God Emperor. So, as you lay dying in the cold mud of a forgotten world, we must ask, is it truly a curse to finally succumb to the meat grinder? Or is death the only true mercy the Imperium can offer? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below.